Preparing it. I think we're live. Okay. We are live on Facebook. Some technical difficulties from the ERW triumvirate.
As Mark said, historians, not techies.
Yeah. Well, good evening, everybody. To welcome to Emerging Revolutionary War. We're going to be talking about the first shots, and we made it here. This week is the 250th anniversary of the beginning of the Revolutionary War and the battles of Lexington and Concord that occurred on April 19th, 1775. And then also for our organization here at Emerging Revolutionary War, this Revelry this evening will mark 5 years of doing these Zoom calls with each other and other historians, and we've kind of now we've done hundreds of these, and now we do these. This started off in April of 2020, right at the beginning of the COVID time, and we continue doing them weekly for a couple years, and now we do them every other week. And in addition to putting it on Facebook, we also put it on our YouTube channel. We also have these on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so people can listen to them wherever. And it's quite an impressive library. Just preparing for the 250th, I kind of went back and listened to all the ones we've done about specifically these events that happened in Boston and in Massachusetts in this time period. And it's a great resource because you can listen for hours with all sorts of different historians and guests. And I think this has been a really fun and interesting thing to do that we kind of branched out of just doing blog posts and writing books and doing bus tours, but also having these conversations with each other and other historians. So but we got a lot of people on the call tonight, and I want to go around and let everybody do a little brief introduction of themselves, who they are, and I for our first question to go around, I want you to introduce yourself, and then explain what your connection to Lexington and Concord is, and what you're going to be doing to mark the 250th anniversary. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. My name is Mark Malloy. I'm with Emerging Revolutionary War. So I've been up to Lexington Concord now a bunch of times. It's one of the coolest historic sites, or all of them up there are really fascinating. And I've always enjoyed learning about it. And now I'm excited for the 250th to be going up there this week with a few other people on this call. And I'm going to be actually traveling the path of Paul Revere's ride in real time from North Church out to Lexington. We're going to be there at Lexington to watch the reenactment on the green at sunrise. And then I'll actually be participating in the reenactment that's happening at Minuteman National Park there, and then I'm also going to follow along with everybody else. We're going to follow the whole battle road all the way back down to Charlestown. So we'll be just as tired as those British soldiers, I'm sure, were from marching all the way from Boston and all the way back in 24 hours. So, but really excited about all the events. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Rob.
Oh, you put me on the spot. I don't think we're going to be as tired as the regulars were, Mark, on the 19th of April. I just don't see it. But Phil and I wrote a book about Lexington and Concord a few years ago, and not from Massachusetts, from Virginia, but every time you go to Lexington and Concord, especially Lexington, if I have a favorite, it's going to be Lexington. But it's a great, as Mark said, it's a great site. There are great sites up there. But what is even better about it is that the community really embraces their history. When you go up and visit there, you get a full sense of the history of the place. And I think that's something that makes any visit up there, whether it's for a big anniversary. Phil and I have been up there for other anniversaries, and Stacy's up there every year for every anniversary. I know we're focusing on the big 250, but the 249th was just as important as the 250th. And the places and the people up there make that place really, really special to visit. So I'm glad we're talking about it tonight. I'm gonna give it to Billy now.
All right.
If we're doing the pass off here, Mark, I'll give it to Billy.
All right. Yeah, I'm Billy Griffith. I've been with Emerging Revolutionary War for about 10 years now, since its conception. But excited to be going up and taking part in these 250th anniversary events. It's going to be a really, really busy next few months. I think all of us, I think, are going to be up in the Boston area 2 of the next 3 weekends.
Yeah.
Yeah, between the events this upcoming weekend and then the American Battlefield Trust Conference. I hate to say it, but last year was the first time I ever went up to Lexington and Concord for the bus tour we did. And being a diehard Yankees fan, I tended to stray away from Massachusetts. Up there, I kind of feel like, one of Thomas Gage's men, having to look over my shoulder, walking around every corner. But I'm open to it more now, so I'm looking forward to getting up there and actually going to a game at Fenway Park.
That's right. We're going on Sunday.
We'll be there. Yep. Let's see them play the White Sox.
That's right.
So that'll be exciting. Bill?
Oh, so I guess Rob stole part of my thunder with the we wrote a book. I guess that Rob and I co-founded Emerging Revolutionary War. I think in the heart of Civil War territory, Spotsylvania, on the back porch, I think with cigars and alcohol, knowing this group was at least one of those two, if not both. I also remember 5 years ago sitting on a balcony in Southwest Florida with a palm tree behind me doing this revelry. Now I'm actually a little closer to the action of Lexington and Concord, halfway there, sitting outside of Baltimore, Maryland. I unfortunately will not make it up to this weekend, April 19th. I'll actually be in green and gray, but at my home park because it is Earth Day celebrations, and I happen to work at a nature park right now. But like the late arriving militia, I will be up there the following weekend. I try to find as historical as a way to get there, so I'm going by train. So I mean that's as close to horse, I guess, as you can get. Not wagon train, but railway. So and my connection, actually, ironically, is came through my hometown of Baltimore. We always talked about April 19th, 1861, and the 6 Massachusetts that marched through, who did hail from that area. And so I think when I was writing the book, Rob had to keep telling me to write 1775, not 1861, in the books, or not talk about love either. I think that was the other thing that went on. So. But with that, we'll have to pass it over to someone who 5 years ago put her reputation on the line by joining that first revelry and is coming back again.
He's here. It's
Ms.
crazy.
Stacey Fraser.
Yeah.
No, that was great. I was actually really glad we got a chance to do that 5 years ago because we were, looking at a virtual Patriots Day and not really sure what that was going to look like yet. So it was a nice chance to talk about, the ideals that are important, no matter whether we're physically having it or whether we were doing it remotely like we did that year. So I'm Stacey Fraser. I grew up in Lexington. A third generation Lexingtonian, which is not a word I love. The Lexington resident instead. And I'm lucky enough to have sort of gotten the history bug early. When you grow up in this town, I feel like you either love it or hate it. And so I studied public history, I worked at a lot of museums, some in New Hampshire. And then about 10 years ago in 2015, I came down. I was living in Lexington again at the time, and I started working for Lexington Historical Society, which is recently rebranded as Lexington History Museums. So I got a chance to work with the Hancock Clark House and Buckman Tavern and Monroe Tavern and all the sites associated. And then just about 3 years ago, I moved over to the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library, which actually opened in Lexington on Patriots Day weekend, 1975. As part of bicentennial celebrations. So for the last 10 years, really, I've gotten a chance in my public history career to be in Lexington and to tell some of these really great stories that, I always knew as a child, but the ability to sort of put more detail and do the firsthand research to get the story for yourself is pretty amazing. So I'm excited for our big anniversary this coming weekend. We're all going to collapse collectively as a town afterwards. But like you said, we'll be back again next year, 251. We're always doing it every year, which is kind of amazing. And I'll pass it to Richard, of course, a former Lexingtonian. See, the word happens even if I don't like it.
You do. I'm Rich Gillespie, and I was conceived in a house overlooking Lexington Green. Didn't grow up there. We moved about a mile away. But at any rate, I was always proud of that minor fact. But when I was 16, I got my first job because my sister had done it before me. You could pass a test in Lexington, which was quite grueling. But if you could do it, then you could become an official Lexington guide and offer your services to visitors. And so my first job ever, it was to be an official Lexington guide. And I did that for 3 summers of high school. And then near the end of my third summer, I transferred over to Buckman Tavern to work for the Lexington Historical Society. And then for the next 3 summers coming home from college, I worked either at Buckman Tavern or the Hancock Clark House or both. Started our evening tour program. And I think that indelibly implanted in me that I wanted to work with public history. I taught for 30 years history, but then retired and went back to public history. And I got to know Rob because he was a public historian working with Prince William County Preservation Division. And I was the educator for the new heritage area in town, which was the Mosby Heritage Area at the time. It's better known today as the Virginia Piedmont Heritage Area. Today, I'm their historian emeritus. But this is great fun getting to talk about this. It's a story that I think is one of the 4 or 5 great stories in American history. And I think for all of you, as you begin to think about it going into this 250, and perhaps revisited some of your earlier jottings or some of your favorite sources, you realize the more we learn, the better this story gets, and the more critical it is at the very root of American history. So it's exciting to be able to do this.
Yeah, no, thanks everybody for coming on here. And I guess, yeah, we can go around too. And I'm interested to know, yeah, what all yours, what's the best stories about this event that you think is overlooked or people don't know that much about, that maybe during this 250th they could, discover more. And I'll start with one. One of the things. It's called the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And we mentioned how, the green and the historic homes and the sites that are preserved and tell those stories, like you say, every year. One of the things that I always, every time I study this and when I'm up there in the actual site is that I think is often forgotten is the fact that, yes, there were battles fought there, but it was really this running battle that goes the entire length, all the way back back to Charlestown. And I feel like that's often forgotten about. Arlington or Monotony is often overlooked, even though when you read about just how awful the fighting was down there later in the day, and like I said, reading and exploring those sites down there, and because that area really hasn't been as preserved as much, it's built up. I just think that's often overlooked, and that's where I thought that we took our fall bus tour in October up to these sites, and we did a whole bus tour, stopping at a bunch of the different sites. But I always thought that the Jason Russell House down there that's preserved by the Arlington Historical Society was just a real gem that I hadn't heard of before looking into the I read about it in Fisher's book Paul Revere's Ride, but didn't realize that that particular house had been preserved and that it was a historic site that you could visit, and being able to go in there and actually see bullet holes from April 19, 1775 just kind of blew my mind. I thought that was just so cool. It was, and I thought it really brought home how this was really a vicious, tragic humans killing each other in this one little area. And like I said, I always thought that was kind of overlooked. So my advice to anybody who is going to be up there for those. Now they're doing the events on Patriots Day on April 19th. And then the day after, on Sunday, Arlington's going to be hosting a reenactment at the Jason Russell House too. So I'll be attending that as well. But I think that's neat that the Arlington, it's often overlooked compared to the other things, are still also trying to preserve their stories as well. So, but anyways, yeah, I'll throw it out there. Anybody else wants to jump in?
I was going to say real quick, it's not really a story from April 1975, but Stacy, you all had, when you were at Lexington at the Buckman Tavern, and Phil and I were up there, a great exhibit about first shots. Where's the first shot? We always say the shot heard around the world. That's referring to Concord, right? But I love the exhibit that you all had about kind of the rivalry between Lexington and Concord over, and I'm sure Rich, you know this too, about where the war began, where's the first shot. And that exhibit was great, talking about how these communities have kind of competed for that kind of attention ever since, 1775. And being an outsider, you really don't understand all of that. But when you kind of think about the poem, right, written by Emerson, talking about Concord, it doesn't talk about Lexington, even though Lexington's the first shot. So I think it's kind of cool that the font when you go up there to see how these two communities commemorate and tell this story, because there is a little bit of rivalry there between those two communities about where the war started. So I think that's kind of a neat little side.
Rob, to put it in your terms, it's like Valley and County. Lexington Concord were a 100-year football rivalry on Thanksgiving morning, and that didn't help. But that rivalry goes all the way back to Lafayette's tour that we're all commemorating now.
That's right.
But I would simply say this: if you go to old cemeteries in New England, whether it's New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, you will find graves of men who fought in the Revolution, responded to that day, and very clearly it says on their grave, Lexington Alarm. Not the North Bridge, not the Concord Alarm, not We Love Ralph Waldo Emerson, just the Lexington Alarm, or and sometimes a really wordy responded to the Lexington Alarm. And I think that minute at Lexington Green becomes so understandable the more we read the accounts and try to put them together, is that particular minute. That said, what I find is the arc that absolutely blows my mind is thinking of Lexington's Minutemen after the British have done their volleys following their damage on Lexington Green, done their huzzas, marched off down the road to continue their mission to Concord. And Reverend Jonas Clark, active member of the Sons of Liberty, brings his Minutemen congregation, he is their chaplain, and other civilians that are their mothers and wives, and brings them into the meeting house where the smoke is just clearing. And they do a very ceremonial eulogy over these Minutemen, a spot on, spot of the moment sermon over these men before they take them out. And in the brush at the far corner of the old burying ground close to the cemetery, these men are interred. That a large company, actually it might have been as many as 3 companies, contingent from the next town of Woburn, stopped by right at the end of that, saw all these. And if we talk about the bloodiest places on the march back, these Woburn men hid themselves at the famous place called a curve in the road back from Concord to Lexington called the Bloody Angle. And then if you think about Captain Parker's own man brings his entire contingent on the rapid march up over Concord Hill, over Fisk Hill, and right to the edge of town where he thinks his orders run out, and takes himself up to a bluff overlooking a key dogleg in the road. And there his men are, almost 130, 140 of them, much larger than they had on the green. And there waits. And we call that Parker's Revenge today. Of course, Park Service likes to make sure that we think of Parker's Revenge as all of the British who were dead in the road. I like to think of Parker's Revenge as being up there in that bluff, because my high school girlfriend and I used to walk there all the time and sit up on the cliff looking out over the view. But if you think about it, those kinds of story arcs, Mark, what you said about the Jason Russell House in Arlington is such a classic example of that. And I think as we research more, the simplicity of the old story gives way to this incredibly interesting or complicated one.
If,
Yeah.
No, it's just kind of jumping in on the storytelling and so forth. One of the counts that really interested me was we always hear about how the guys got there, the militia and Minutemen. We hear about of course the famous shot heard around the world, and John Furling, actually the great historian, just came out with a book called Shots Heard Around the World and talking about how the vibrations. But one of the things that amazes me, especially in an era where instant communication, instant connection is not only prior to it when Paul Revere rides out yelling the redcoats or the regulars are coming and not the British, that it sets off this chain reaction that people can come. But also before thinking of Dr. Warren on the day after, getting these accounts, getting these primary sources together to package and get to London, because knowing that the first word is what people will believe, the first accounts is what, and getting that empathetic vote and putting what Lord North's ministry on the back foot because Gage's report takes so long to get there. And it's something that you think about today and all the different engagements and campaigns and so forth, where you try to get the first word out is what's most important. And Dr. Warren seeing that on the day after and getting it while it's fresh in these people's minds and getting it to London in 6 weeks, which is an amazing amount of time in April. So that story the day after, I think, is really what sets Lexington and Concord on that movement of like why this is the proverbial shot heard around the world or starts the shots heard around the world.
Well, and not only that, Phil, but Joseph Palmer of the Worcester Committee of Correspondence is, or Committee of Safety, is writing a letter about what happened in the morning, like at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and sending that on to Philadelphia and Charleston and other places. So the day's fighting hasn't even ended, and he's already starting to get the information out there to people. I think that's pretty amazing.
That whole committees of correspondence notion
Yeah.
is very, very important here.
Yeah, to the fact that they were sort of prepared and ready to do this when the time came. I think one thing that the reenactors and the living historians have done a great job with over the last, 5 or 10 years is also expanding the story to the non-combatants role as well. So the idea that, like we said, we've got so many militia members from, I think by the end of the day, it's 24 Massachusetts towns who respond. And that's just that day. We know more come in afterwards. But the idea that, the women and the children and anyone under 16 who's not, eligible to fight, they're all in these communities along the road wondering what's going to happen because they experienced, the troops marching past their house overnight early in the morning and then the battle on the green and then they march off to the west, but they know Lexington's on the road back, so they have to sort of plan for what's going to happen. We really don't know if the British troops are going to, maintain order, if they're going to be damaging. They're not supposed to be damaging personal property, but who knows what's going to happen. So the idea of someone like Lydia Loring, who was the daughter of the church deacon, who has the church silver, all the communion silver, which is a really valuable asset for the community and for the church, stored at his house. And she takes the communion silver and she hides it in the yard because she's not sure what's going to happen. And in the end, the Loring's house is one of the houses that the British troops burned down and pillaged. So had she not done that, that silver would not have survived, most likely. And because she did, that silver is on display in the exhibition that we opened today because we have a long-term loan with First Parish, which is sort of the predecessor or the successor to the church at Lexington that was in the meeting house. So that idea of sort of saving the community's assets, protecting, their homes, their children from sort of further violence because they really weren't sure what was going to happen on the way back. I think that really helps you understand like why it was so important, not just as a military engagement, but for all the communities that were affected by this, 24 hours of really unexpected events. And that really, I think, helps solidify that idea that like this was really something outside of the norm. This is not two battles or a battle between two opposing forces on, drawn up on a green or on a battlefield with guidelines. It's a whole kind of running battle that's affecting the communities, affecting everyone in the houses along the road. And I think that really helps expand the story a little bit too, even more.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's very true. It's something that really jumps out to me when going and learning about these battles and the sites is, yeah, it literally happening on people's front doorsteps. Of course, they have that plaque for the Jonathan Harrington of dying with his wife at his wife's feet. You have Jason Russell being bayoneted to death on his front doorstep, saying an Englishman's home is his castle right before that happens. I mean, it really shows you how this wasn't on a battlefield somewhere, and it just kind of the war came to people's doorsteps quite literally. And you're right, you try to imagine what it was like for civilians caught up in the middle of it. It also makes me just think about like the civilians. You talk about all these people responding to the alarm from all across New England. I mean, you can imagine, the militiaman leaving his home and the wife and children not knowing, when he's coming back or if he's going to come back, and it just must have been fraught with anxiety for everybody that was caught up in this whole thing. So,
Yeah, kind of going a little bit off of what Mark said as well as Stacy about this running battle. I know we had talked a little bit about it when we were up there back in the fall, but we don't really think about how when the British land and begin their march through Lexington and onto Concord, that maybe it's in the back of their minds, but I don't think any of them are really anticipating a battle, that they're actually marching into a fight that day. The majority of them obviously never being in combat themselves. And everything happens. And Mark mentioned, being exhausted, collapsing once they get back to Charlestown. What was not just the physical exhaustion that they're facing, the mental exhaustion, but the emotional trauma that the British are enduring, not realizing what the heck just happened. Right. And as well as the Minutemen and militiamen too, not anticipating this, and all of a sudden, this signal event in not just American history, but world history happens. And then going off of that, this event is so important, yet we don't actually know who fired the first shot all these years later, 250 years ago. There's still so many conflicting accounts that we have no idea. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's real quick, Mark, I was going to say, Billy brought up a good point. These guys go out from Letchmere Point and they don't know they're walking into a battle. And this is just one of many excursions the regulars take, right? They go to Salem, this is one of many times they have gone out, and it's always been tense. It's always been kind of, could go either way, but shots were never really fired. And I think, when you look at what happened on the green, there's a big debate about what Parker really said, and I really think Parker just has his men there to kind of just show force, but he has no intent of engaging in a fight. And I think at the time, as Billy says, no one knows who fired that first shot, but there's a lot of tension going on both sides. And talk about those regulars, they're kids, right? I mean, I know we call them the best trained army in the world at the time. Not all these guys were well trained. None of these guys, most of these guys, not seen combat, and they're young. And though I do kind of fall on the Patriot side of the debate, but they had been harassed while they were in Boston. So, put yourself as a 19, 20-year-old kid getting harassed constantly. I mean, we always have a shorter fuse when we're younger. So I always kind of put myself in that mindset that,
Yes.
the common soldier doesn't really get to choose when things really happen, and they're just kind of subject to gauge and others' whims. So it's always common.
Jump in on Rob's comment. One of the things that I've never been able to figure out or understand is the formation and the units. Obviously, he pulls the light infantry, he pulls the grenadiers. These are supposed to be the best, well trained, the most physical. I would definitely have been in the Grenadiers at 6'5". They would have put me in that. But this is one of the first times where, like, when you're standing at Letchmere Point, because some of the soldiers stand there for a decent amount of time as the others come off loading, they've got to understand that something is different because these are light infantry troops from a different regiment. These are Grenadiers from a different regiment. If you look at like the Salem alarm or whatever, that is just one unit going out under Leslie, or they're the same unit. So now, not only are you adding the stress of like, okay, we're going out to another excursion after being harassed, now we're going out with a very convoluted command structure. And you see that at the North Bridge at Concord when they start to fall back and trying to form how to fight in an urban setting and command cohesion. And they're kind of forget about the one company way out of the Barrett farm. And those poor bastards are coming back going, what the hell's going on? But I was just always curious of like that you don't really read accounts of like, okay, at that point, when we're standing there at Letchmere Point, we know this is going to be a different excursion because we're bringing out kind of the all-stars of all the British units in Boston to this. What does this mean? And I've just never been. I've just kind of yeah, I've been curious. I don't know if there's something I've missed, but just a point I've
I think that's a
thought about
great
recently.
point. Uh, Plus, one has to ask the inevitable, how long did it take them to get their footgear dry after wading through the marsh and the tidal bit that some of them had to march through? And you're thinking about, were they dry by the time they got to Menotomy? Were they dry by the time they got to Lexington?
Mm-hmm.
Were they getting blisters? I drop it at that.
No.
Yeah, valid points.
Walked around with wet socks, and it's not enjoyable, so I can't imagine. Something about that march of the British going out there too. Once they start to realize, when they start hearing all the signal guns going off, the bells ringing, the fires burning, the realizing that the whole countryside knows they're coming now, and then after what happens at Lexington on the way to Concord, actually seeing some of these militia companies coming together and converging on them, and then realizing, that they got to get all the way back, must have been just terrifying for these guys trying to figure out how they're gonna get there. And that brings me to another story that I think is often overlooked, and I think it really showcases the brutality of the war. And that's when after the shots are fired across the North Bridge, when a militiaman comes up to a wounded British soldier and drops his hatchet on the British soldier's head. And while the soldier is lying on the ground, another company of British soldiers marches by him, sees him with his head cut open, and all of a sudden, they realize that there's fear that they're going to actually be scalping wounded soldiers or killing wounded soldiers, and it just kind of ups the ante for the rest of the day, which just must have being 18 miles away from home base and realizing that you're gonna have to fight your way back must have been terrifying for those guys.
Must have been terrifying to see the spectators. I mean, as you came towards Lexington, I've tried to figure this out. If you're coming from Boston towards Lexington and the roads diverge there, if you're going to Concord, you take the left one. But this meeting house right behind Mark's head in the painting of 1886, how much of Captain Parker's company could you see? There were supposedly 70 odd of them. Their standard parade ground, one might assume, is about where the flagpole in the green is today. In other words, the middle of the green. But we also know that Parker and his men moved a bit when they began to perceive that some of the British companies were coming around onto the Bedford Road. In other words, from their viewpoint, looking at Mark's painting here, coming around to the left of that meeting house there. And I think it's interesting that we don't know how much they could see. We do know that Parker's men moved back some and moved towards the Bedford Road. Today, there's a marker. We always questioned that, but the more you read the accounts, you realize that marker that supposedly marks where the Minutemen were standing, that's their fallback position, because they're probably trying to do two things at once. One, the standing order, which is to be an army of observation. And if you're going to do that, if you're standing alongside the left-hand fork, the road to Concord, you are literally going to get in trouble. And if you're standing a little bit back, but along the right-hand fork, the Bedford Road, you're also with the possibility of guarding Hancock and Adams, who may or may not have vacated the premises at the parsonage a quarter of a mile away. You might wonder if the Minutemen were wondering why Paul Revere and Hancock's man Lowell were carrying this chest of provincial Congress papers, or for the Minutemen's perspective, whatever the heck it was, and they would yell, "Yeah, this is Hancock's stuff." They must have been close. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you get in the heads of these men, as you're all saying, that everything seems so weird, and then you see these men evidently on the green, you could see them as you're coming up the road, at least some of them sticking out on the right-hand side of the meeting house, then you wonder, whoa, is it any wonder that some of those first companies did not follow what evidently was the intent to go on the Concord Road, and started around that north side of the meeting house towards these unknown number of men, which they had been told might be 2 to 4 or 500. If you crawl inside the British soldier's mind, or even the junior officer's mind, the thing that keeps striking me is it all makes sense.
I like to build on Richard's point there, and that show that that is how we probably know that they're not going after the Hancock and Adams at the parsonage, because if that is your goal in Lexington, then what Pitcairn or Smith would have been closer to the front of the line and not letting a hothead younger junior officer march into Lexington. But if your design is to get through these towns to Concord to the supplies, then obviously you're not going to be at the front of the column through every town. You're going to let the junior officers go through. And so I think, as you said that point, it may kind of clicked in my head that maybe that is the defining point why I think it's Jesse Adair or whatever is up front, that why Pitcairn or Smith, two more at least veteran officers or older gentlemen, aren't leading the column, because they're not expecting anything in Lexington. They're not trying to aim for Lexington, not to minimize Lexington's importance, but they're trying to get through it to Concord. Maybe and that's why the action kind of happens and you have this junior officer. But just that's just an hypothesis that I thought of at 7:39 while you were talking. So just throwing it out there.
That's true. I mean, you could blame it all on a failure in British leadership at this moment. Like you said, Phil, letting a junior officers kind of veer away from the intended route. And then Pitcairn rides up, and Smith comes up at the end, and he is chastising those for not obeying their officers. It all goes back then to who fired that first shot again.
I wanted to be Major Mitchell just because I think he's a total jerk.
I think his pistol went off when his horse started to run.
Yeah, accident.
In Lexington, for years, they blamed it on Pitcairn, and they proudly showed at the museum at the Hancock Clark has Pitcairn's pistols. But that doesn't make any sense if you're a 40-something Royal Marine and you're a Scot and you're a Presbyterian minister's son. You're all about obeying. You're all about order. It doesn't make any sense it would have been him. But if you look at the yahoos that have shown themselves to be yahoos ever since they went through Cambridge, capturing Revere, slicing up the Lincoln Minuteman Josiah Nelson with a saber cut, I was like, these people did one screwy thing after another. And why would they send them this mission, just to get them out of Boston or what?
Scots obey orders? Scots, I lost you right there when you said Scots obey orders.
Presbyterian ministers' sons, maybe.
Oh, there you go.
Well, I have a question for all of you, and I wondered if I could toss this out. We've been talking about the march back by the British, but then, of course, several of us have been mentioning this march out from Lexington by Woburn men, Lexington men, and the like. And I found one detail today when I was rummaging around for something else. I'd always known that it is said that the Minutemen marching on the far side of the Concord River down from Punkatasset Hill to the North Bridge are playing the White Cockade. I didn't know that Captain Parker instructed his drummer and fifer to play the White Cockade from Lexington to this bluff. And, Parker's Revenge, if you will. And if you think about the symbolism of that in Puritan New England, where they totally were Hanoverians back during the late, great 1745-46 Rising, Bonnie Prince Charlie and so forth, to play his theme song evidently was popular at the time, but it still seems to be terribly symbolic. And I wondered what y'all's take on that was. Is it symbolic, or is it just a popular song by that time?
Wow, that's deep, Rich.
I know. Good question. I mean, he did have Monroes in the company, and those Monroes really, kept that Scottish accent for a long time. The area they lived in was called Scotland, in Lexington. So I wonder if there was some of that. Some of his men maybe were fans of that, of the Scottish resistance in that situation, and were inspired to suggest it. It's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about what kind of connections how many of the I guess it would depend. I'd have to look at like all the different soldiers and see what their individual connections were. But I'm just jealous that I think Rob has said this that Lexington and Concord are April 19th, 1775 is like the best documented action because of all these depositions they do afterwards. The very fact that we know, what tunes they're playing while they're going back and forth is just
Well,
amazing.
it's both
And
sides too, you know. I mean, it's probably like Mark said. I like to say it's the most documented day in American history of the 18th and probably 19th, including 19th century, because nothing in the 19th century. I mean, everyone, as has already been talked about, everyone was interviewed, right? Well, not everyone. Most people were interviewed on both sides. You know, I mean, both sides really start playing that propaganda game, right? They're trying to win public opinion. You know, the British leaders are still trying to keep these colonies as part of the empire. And, you know, when you see these interviews literally days after the events, we're not talking about an oral history of 40 years afterwards where, you know, how accurate it is. These are just a couple of days after the next day, in many cases, they're interviewed. And it's just amazing being able to have access to all that and being able to dig into some of these stories. And if you read them, you can see some of it is played up, right? Because you can tell they're trying to, you know, provide support to one side or the other, but it's amazing how documented it is.
I mean, the build on that point is just the one word defiance. I think you look at a lot of these militiamen and minutemen, they are younger. They've been raised like the Monroes on stories of the Jacobites or rebellion. Or if you just extrapolate into today's world, I mean, look at what teenagers and from any build up to any war, trying to stick it to the crown or the royal official or to the government or whatever else, and you play this song. So now you have this rising up. And I think maybe it just goes back to just the simple defiance and playing a tune that is popular for last time somebody tried to stick it to the British.
Hmm.
and I
Is that
think it's
appropriate to say? Stick it to the British? Whatever the PC is, to stick it to the British.
well, I one of the things that's fascinating about these battles too is they were all British, and the fact that, like I said, when you have Jason Russell talking about, they thought they were fighting, at least in my opinion, they're fighting, for their rights as Englishmen, and I don't think, whereas I think some of the leaders maybe they had thoughts of independence one day, but I thought a lot of this is not any sort of, we kind of look back on it from today as this is the beginning of a 8-year long war that results with our independence. But at that time, and that's something also maybe anybody has any ideas of, because it does go from these battles straight into them laying siege to the British in Boston. And did they envision this was going to be a long drawn out war after April 19th? And yeah, and it's interesting because me and Rob usually when we go to some of these sites, we like to put flags at the graves of men who fought and died there. Then you're putting like an American flag at some of these guys' graves. They would not even know what an American flag was. They would, it's just very interesting to think from our perspective. We view them as the Americans versus the British, but it's really the British against the British. And and you're right, like what's going through their minds? How much are they creating a revolution? How much of this is trying to strike out on our own, and how much of this is just defending their homes for what they saw as these armies were marching through their hometowns? So
I would say that messing with the Massachusetts Charter of 1691, which was already messing with both Massachusetts and Plymouth Colony and slamming them together, you take that away, which the Massachusetts Government Act did, and you start saying you can't have a town meeting without the governor giving permission. You start looking at what that act did. I would say that the minute it becomes apparent that parliamentary elections put people who are even more strongly supportive of King George III's policy through his prime minister, I would say that independence, if you had a good conversation with somebody, would be the only way we could become truly Englishmen with the rights of Englishmen. Seems odd to say that, but think about it. How else could you do it?
Hmm.
And that, the idea of an American independent republic may not be on their mind, but New England colonies were fiercely jealous of their charters if they had one. And Massachusetts people, it's like, for you Yankee fans, Bostonians don't take being shut on very happily. So I really wonder if their minds weren't already turning. And the other thing that you think about it, we like to think about the radical Bostonians. Some of you are well aware of this idea that because you can't have town meetings, we'll do something. New Englanders don't particularly care about. Massachusetts people certainly don't. We're going to have county conventions. And when we begin to look at those conventions that they begin to hold, but Berkshire County, the one furthest away from Boston, think of James Taylor's driving from Boston to Stockbridge or whatever. It's all the way out the Mass Pike out there. And they meet at Stockbridge beginning of July, which is a month after the closing of Boston, at the Widow Bingham's Tavern. And I'm thinking to myself, whoa, these people are way ahead of Boston. And then you look at the massive uprising at Worcester in early September, a couple of months later, and these people are central Massachusetts. They were nowhere near Boston. This is not just a Boston thing. This has evidently gotten inculcated into the culture of every Massachusetts county, all the way up to Lincoln County, which is Maine now. And the same with their Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island brethren. I think it was Virginia that was going to be a little slower to come to this, but that doesn't mean we weren't coming to it. How else do we explain that down in Virginia, we have independent militias drilling in Prince William County and Fairfax County and Loudoun County? These are illegal. It's the same thing the alarmists and Minutemen companies are doing up in Massachusetts.
I think, Rich, you bring a good point. Being an outsider and growing up learning about this, you always popularly are told that it's Boston is the hotbed of things going on. And as you point out, as you read more, you find out it's not really the city of, I mean, Boston is, but there's all those communities, as you said, all the way to the western hinterlands of Massachusetts are just as gung-ho, more gung-ho than people realize. And I think you're right. It's that charter. It's a big deal. And those town meetings are a big deal. I mean, and I think I think one of the myths that exist out there is Boston is where all the problems, quote unquote, started. And it's kind of everywhere throughout the entire colony.
Yeah, I think one thing was really significant was, looking at even as far before as 1768, 69, 1770. 1769 is the year that 45 young women in Lexington gather for a spinning protest. Basically, they bought, a bunch of spinning wheels from Captain Parker, who made those as a wheelwright. He hadn't made a bunch in recent years because you could buy ready-made cloth from England. So why would you make your own at home? Because that's more work. But these young women decided it's important to us to show that we're boycotting British textiles and we're going to have a protest. 45 women chosen probably for the Wilkes and 45, motto. And they are one of 60 protests from Berwick, Maine down to Long Island, basically, during these 3 years. So it's a very key thing where you're seeing it across all demographics. You've got young women who are involved in these political protests, like I said, all the way from Maine down to New York. And I think that really shows a good sense of like, it really isn't just Boston. It is Boston, but it's not just Boston. There's so much of New England that is really independent and not comfortable with this level of influence or sort of interference, I guess, from government in London.
So do you think when Thomas Gage receives his orders to head towards Concord from Dartmouth, obviously British recognize that the Massachusetts colony is in a state of rebellion. All right, even though no real shots had been fired yet, his orders are to put down this rebellion. Do you think that either Gage or even overseas in Parliament that they could have anticipated that this Massachusetts problem, if there's shots fired, that this could explode into a problem all along the 13 colonies?
I think so. So William Pitt, is obviously sympathetic to the colonial cause a little bit, but he basically says, in January, even now, sort of the fatal shot may be fired that might involve millions in the consequences. So I feel like Parliament is really after the powder alarm and after, the four cannon are stolen out of the British gun house right under the noses of the soldiers, basically. There's, I think, a sense, and then Salem's Leslie's Retreat. I think there really is a sense that like something is going to happen soon, or what if something happens soon, it's going to have impact. It's not going to be a one-off because we've had so many one-offs, and now we're getting to a point where there's like a pattern, and people are fed up a little bit.
Really, if you look
I
at
think Gage
Dartmouth's
knew.
orders, isn't he
Mhm.
basically saying, you've been worried about starting this, now meet force with force? So basically giving him permission that that game is over.
Yeah. And I think Gage knew, Billy. I mean, if you look at, I'm going to paraphrase this. I don't have it in front of me, but he says, if you think 1,000 is enough men to send me 10. If you think a million, send me 10 million. Like, he's like, whatever you think it is, double what you think it is. That's what I need. Things are pretty horrible here. And, Gage is in a no-win situation. I mean, I'm not trying to be like Billy and pro-British. Sorry, Billy. I got cut. But you know, he he's what's he going to do, right? I mean, you clamp down really hard, you just make the problem worse. If you don't enforce the law as you think the law is, then you're seen as weak. So I don't know I don't know how he could have done. He could have done some things better, but I'm not exactly sure anything he would have done would have ended in a different way.
Mhm.
And also, you had the point in, I mean, you see this in when you're facing every insurgency, the vastness of the interior. I mean, and the belief that, okay, if you get the heads of this, the rest will wither. You do it from the revolution. You can look at other wars that the United States have fought in, or even Great Britain and so forth. Is like, okay, and that's kind of the belief is like, okay, if you just get the rebel rousers, the rest are going to fall back in line. But what they don't realize is how much this is permeated throughout the first Massachusetts, then New England, and then so forth. Because once these committees of correspondence, the committees of safety get started, the idea starts to germinate. You can't unseat it. And so I think that's where, I mean, Engage starts to. That's why he says, "Give me this amount of troops," because he's trying to show that the problem is bigger than Dartmouth and Lord North and everyone else is realizing 3,000 miles away when they think it's just an agitated. And I also wonder how much Dartmouth actually knew about North America and how big it was and so forth.
Didn't have a
I mean,
map.
yeah, having a map. I mean, you see some of these early maps, the lines are crazy, especially in Virginia when you have the Fairfax, the colonial maps, they're kind of overlapping. But
You know, you bring up something I want to ask Stacy and Rich since they both interpret the story. You bring up the point about, cutting off the heads of the snake. And, Gage had permission to capture Adams and Hancock, and that's kind of one of the things many historians have debated ever since was, what was the point of the regulars going out? And I think we all agree it's not Hancock and Adams. But I'm gonna ask Stacy and Rich to think about like when you all interpret this story or have interpreted the story, what are some of the biggest challenges you guys have had? Mark mentioned Jonathan Harrington, dying on the front steps of his house, which is not probably all that accurate. He did die on the green, but probably not in the arms of his wife on the steps. Mark will
What?
kill me for saying that. And Rich is mad too. Look at that.
Hey,
But
it was the challenge. If you were a male in Lexington, that you better get ye up to that stone step, which was soaked with blood, and touch it and run back and not get caught.
I
And I
love
have
you,
to say,
Rich.
I knew the lady was the president of the board of the Lexington Historical Society, and she lived in it for many years. And I asked her, what was that like? She says, my God, it's like all times of day, kids are running up to my front step and touching it. That's blood. So if that story isn't true, then good Lord, I'm going to become a scientist.
Oh, it's a good debate. Well, anyway, what are some other things like Stacey that you guys have like you worked in Lexington where you work now, where visitors come up and they have these preconceived notions of Lexington? Like, what are some of the challenges of that of telling this story?
I think it is tricky because, like we said, despite it being a really well documented day, You can't convey that level of detail. Like that level of detail doesn't stick. People get sort of the broad strokes, they get sort of the mythology, the stuff that sounds good, that feels good, and they stick with that. And so sometimes when you try to like expand it and say, in fact, no, Jonathan Harrington didn't die in that friend's death, probably. Or, Captain Parker probably didn't say, if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. People are horrified because it feels like that's part of the story for them because that's how they got it, and that's how they think of it. So I think sometimes the details can be good and bad, right? You want to give people those details so they understand the whole scope of the whole story. But when those details challenge what they already believe, that's a bit of a struggle sometimes. You have to sort of break it down gently and break it to them gently that, that didn't happen or this did happen. And, here's the real story based on what we can find from primary sources and help them understand, what really happened and not just kind of lean into those preconceived notions, I think.
Right.
I would love to know how people's preconceptions have changed from when I started on Lexington Green, and even in the three, well, more than 3 years that you went to the historic Lexington museums there, and then you went to the Scottish Rites Museum. How have you seen that evolve? We're seeing the whole revolution thing from the perspective of the 250 movement, the Virginia 250, has what the expectations are has shifted like massively in just 2.5 years. And part of that is a reflection of national events, what's going on in Washington, whatever. But I wonder if the questions you're getting have evolved.
It's a good question. I think to some degree, we haven't hit like critical mass in terms of like the people that are going to be coming next week who may not, come every year. Because we do get a lot of people like Rob and Phil and Billy and Mark and others who come every year. And so they have a better sense of the story than sort of the day tripper, for lack of a better term. So I think it'll be interesting to see what people are thinking. But I do think that, the bicentennial did such a great job of helping people understand it is about, say, Hancock and Adams, but it's not just about the Hancocks and Adams. It's about the Parkers and all those Monroes and Captain Parker's company and, Lydia Loring and the Silver. And I think that's helped a lot. And I think the fact that, the Minuteman has done a lot of research, archaeological research on Parker's Revenge and really was able to figure out exactly where that was, where everything happened. I think people hopefully are starting to recognize a little bit that there is so much more to this story. And I think that's something that I have seen a little bit with visitors to town is sort of that they heard, even if they don't know all the details, they heard, oh, Prince Esterbrook, there was a black soldier on the green. Tell me about that. And so even though those stories have been around forever, there's maybe a little bit better interpretation or understanding of it by the general public. And I think that's really nice because we can give them that information. We have it now. And so that can help deepen what they're seeing. And maybe they're not just asking about Captain Parker, they're asking about other people in the community, for example.
All right. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time here tonight. So we've been getting great engagement on Facebook. We got some good comments from Christopher Jenkins, who has worked up there. And I also see Paul says, for my conundrum on what flag to place at the grave, he said he bought a replica of the Bedford flag to be able to put at the graves, which is a good one to put up there. And but I just want to go around one time each and just say, if there's a resource, it could be a book, it could be a site to visit. How can people learn more? And I'll go ahead and start and say, well, first of all, I'll say, the best way to actually learn is to go to the site. I'll say one of the overlooked sites, and I can't believe we didn't mention him tonight, but I love going to the marker for where Samuel Whittemore made his stand, who is 78 years old and was shot in the face and bayoneted multiple times and survived and lived to be 96 years old before he died, which is pretty cool story. And I'm glad it's marked. That's one of the neat things. Even in the areas that aren't preserved, they've done a great job over the years of putting up monuments and markers to denote where these significant places took place. And one I haven't been to yet that I want to see is one of the last deaths right near Charlestown. I think it says on there that he's too old to run, and so he didn't run. They told him he should get out of there, and he ended up dying in the fighting there. But I will say a good source for information, A Single Blow by Rob and Phil here, which is a great book
I
because
owe you a beer, Mark.
it tells you the story, and it gives you driving directions to a lot of the different sites. So definitely a great resource. But I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, Rob.
Um, Site, it's not hard. It's the green at Lexington. It's to me, I mean, just going there. A couple years ago, we were driving back from Maine with our kids, and we weren't going to Lexington, but I said we're going close enough, and we just pulled in just to take my kids out to the green so they can see it. Not even knowing what the story is, or too young to get it, but I wanted them to be able to say they were there, and they've been back since, of course. As far as books go, our good friend J.L. Bell, the Road to Concord, about the cannon that were stolen out of Boston, is a great book about the reason we think this thing happened. And Alex Kane, who's been on our Revelry before, who's helped us with tours before. Alex is great. He has a great book about just Lexington in general, and it's very deep, lots of great research. It's a great read. And Alex is a good guy and a great tour guide too. Billy or Phil, because
Yeah, I'll go.
the experts.
Yeah, I think Rob and Phil's book is definitely a go-to resource, especially if you're visiting the sites up there. One of the most powerful things from my experience going up there the first time, and definitely be returning to those sites this month, but is seeing along Battle Road the British graves. It's the same kind of feeling. You're down in Yorktown seeing the French burial sites, going overseas and seeing American graves. It's the notion of these young men going off to war, traveling thousands and thousands of miles away from home, only to die in a foreign place, never to see home again. And I love the human side of this story, that I know we all try our best to hammer home with people, that this isn't just men in red coats and militiamen like behind Mark in the painting. These are real people, no different than us, just living in a different time.
All right. Well, if we're going how we started, then I'll go next. I had like a list of books beside my own, obviously, and then suddenly like Rob started checking them off, and then we have the I mean Fisher's a book or whatnot, but I'm gonna go on the theme that I started with. Our friend Christian Despigna wrote a great book about founding martyr with Dr. Warren, and um and I'll pick that an interesting site is the Jonathan Hastings House marker near Harvard. And it's where some of these guys show up on April 19th and into the morning of April 20th. And it's overlooked as the de facto headquarters of the provincial Congress or the military that will besiege Boston. And so it captures the ideas of Lexington and Concord and continues that momentum into that great question, what's next? And so if you're going to the Cambridge Commons and you're looking back toward Harvard, it's off to the left. Or if you can do a little bit of Mark here, I'll self promote. If you wait about a year, there'll be a book out about Bunker Hill in the RW series, and we do have the marker, and it will be identified in that book. But the Jonathan Hastings House is the first headquarters for whatever the United Colony military conglomerate. So I'll go with that, and then I'll pass it over to Stacy.
All right. So for resources, I'm going to promote Joel Bowie's book. Joel Bowie and Doug Scott just came out in December or January, I believe, about first shot, the impact, basically musket ball and cannonball impacts on the first day of the American Revolution. And Joel actually started that research March of 2020. So about 5 years ago, he came and visited. I think we were at Monroe Tavern that day, and just looking at the literal impact, where musket balls went through the attic of the Merritt Monroe house across from the green, or where, they went to the ceiling of Monroe Tavern, or a portrait. There's a family portrait that has, a hole that was been mended in the canvas from a musket ball that day. So they did a great look, and they also did some really amazing ballistic studies. So they took ballistics gels and, did these live fire sessions so they could see what the impact is. When James Hayward gets hit by a ball that goes through his powder horn at the Fisk farm that day, they did a test with ballistics gel and, woolen cloth and, powder horn, and then blew the ball through that to kind of see what that would do to his body, for example. So there's some really amazing detail in that, and that just came out, so that's really great. And then I have to promote my own museum, of course, because we just opened a show today about Lexington's role in the Revolution. And that has been a labor of love over the last year and a half, but also probably much longer, really, because I was drawing on a lot of research that, we had done over the last 5 or 10 years. And it really gave me a chance to take a look at a lot of different Lexington people. There's about 50 different people from Lexington named in the show, from all walks of life. Like I said, some of the young women, the young women hosted the spinning protest in 1769. Prince Estabrook, the first black soldier on the green. Eli Berdue, who was a young man who was orphaned when his father died in the French and Indian War, fighting in the French and Indian War. And then he became a soldier in the Revolutionary War and was lost after he was taken prisoner in Charleston in 1780. So lots of different stories from Lexington over the years, but we also finished up with a section about not just that, but how Lexington as a community has commemorated all of this basically over, from Clark talking about it in 1776 on the first anniversary to Washington's visit in 1789 and all the way up through, all the presidential visits, Lafayette's visit, Grant, Ford, everybody. And so it was a really nice opportunity to not just see what happened that day and sort of why it happened, but also how the community has kind of carried it through to the present day in sort of honoring the story and those sacrifices early on. So Scotch Rite Masonic Museum and Library, 33 Merritt Road in Lexington, open Monday through Friday, 9 to 4. And we're also open on the 19th, on the 21st, and on the 26th. So come visit.
And of course, on the grounds of your site, action did occur.
Yes, exactly.
I would recommend, in terms of sites, I don't think I halfway appreciated, even working at these sites, how much of a story and how much of a feel they convey. And that would be going from east to west, the Monroe Tavern, which the British will use as headquarters for Earl Percy's relief expedition, Buckman Tavern, where Minutemen will wait before the action on the green, and the Hancock Clark House, the parsonage of Reverend Jonas Clark. And yes, Hancock and Adams stayed there. I would simply say Jonas Clark may be one of the most important figures. Remember, in a New England town at this time, there would be two people that matter. One, your militia captain or alarm list captain, John Parker, and the other would be your minister of the local Congregationalist church. Jonas Clark was an active Sons of Liberty member. And I would tell you that if you look at the words that are on the monument at Lexington, the oldest monument to the Revolution, erected in 1799, there is one line that always, I can't even read this short line without getting emotional. But it says of the Lexington Minutemen and those who rose up that day, they nobly dared to be free. And if you follow that all the way through with all of the other ones who stood up, that becomes a very moving thing. To stand on the green early in the morning or as the gloaming comes on is one of the most touching things ever. We began evening tours because we realized that to capture that moment of light was something terribly valuable and that was moving to people. Finally, I think all of you have talked about the Battle Road. And when Minuteman National Historical Park was created, I was a little kid and they were going to tear down all kinds of things. My buddy Janet Shana's house was going to be torn down, and my vet was going to be torn down, and the Paul Revere cabins was going to be torn down.
And the Willow Pond Kitchen.
Yeah, and the Willow Pond Kitchen where the best beer and clams could be had in Concord. But all of those were going to go. But today, all of that's been done. But if you go to where the fighting breaks out on the march back, Miriam's Corner, and you go from there and you walk that trail through beautiful New England countryside. It lets you know what New England was at the time, all the reclaimed farmland and the like. You can go there, and then you can go past that bloody angle. You can go past Parker's Revenge, and then you can move on to Lexington Green, or even give up a little shy of Lexington Green at Fisk Hill. All of that gives you a phenomenal sense of that day, a phenomenal sense of New England. Book-wise, I agree with all of your choices. Rob and Phil, absolutely. What a useful book. My favorite this time around, because I've done a deep read this time, is to get ready for a talk I had to do earlier in the day. And I found General Gavin's book, The Minutemen, that looked at this from a military perspective. And I'm sure my fellow contestants here are aware of that book, but it was Alex Kane that kind of turned me onto that book, and it's like, wow, is that a useful book? But reading the current crop out there, I don't think there's a bad one in the group, although I'm sure I'll find one sooner or later. So it's happy reading for all of us as we're going here into the 250. And there's so much more to learn that we've figured out over the years. Today, though, it was an 1851 book that I turned to for my final irrelevant detail. And I don't know that this one is true, because this historian Lossing is not known for being absolutely factual. But the idea that early morning on Lexington Green, there were dandelions growing because it had been a very soft winter and early spring. I don't know if that's true. I don't remember dandelions much before May in Massachusetts, but the image of Minutemen standing in 8-inch high grass with dandelions absolutely makes me very, very happy and moved.
Well, thank you all, and yeah, those are all great resources. And like I said, some of us are fortunate to be able to make it up there for the 250th events this weekend. If you are unable to be up there for the events, you can come to your home for the 250th Emerging Revolutionary War. We're going to be doing videos up there from many of the different spots in real time, so you can just follow along on our Facebook page. We'll be posting those throughout April 18th and 19th and 20th while we're up there. So looking forward to it. But thank you all for joining us this evening, and we'll be back here in a couple weeks with our next Rev War Revelry. But thank you all for joining us.